Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird. Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
See You on the Other Side, episode 252. Today we talk The Terror in the Skies and an interview with filmmaker from Small Town Monsters, Seth Breedlove. Now, Seth is the creative powerhouse behind the Small Town Monsters documentary series. It's available on Amazon Prime, Vimeo, DVD. The newest release also stars my lovely and talented sister, our very own Allison Jornlin. Both Seth and Allison are joining us today to reveal this rest of the story behind Terror in the Skies, which is a documentary about Thunderbirds and flying humanoids over Illinois. Welcome, you crazy kids.
Yay!
Hurrah!
I'm excited to talk to you today, Seth, but we need to address the elephant in the room.
Right.
The clock
as you
chime
guys
in the
are
room.
probably hearing.
Are you holding an ice cream man by knife point in the background? Like, what's going on in your background?
No, they put this, so they built this clock or put this clock in downtown Wadsworth where I live, and it sits on the square, and it was like a gift from some sort of like small town commission or something. And originally, it's been here since I moved in October, but originally it was playing like maybe once every hour or so. I actually think it was more like every 2 to 3 hours because it definitely wasn't constant. And then like a week ago, I saw them down there tinkering with it, and I thought to myself, this could be a problem. And sure enough, like on Monday when I came back in, it was playing. So it's playing every 57 minutes, and it plays anywhere from like 2 minutes to 6 minutes. And there's also like the emergency departmay's are down here too, so you'll hear a lot of like sirens going off and stuff outside of my office. But I'm in like Mayberry. I'm essentially in Mayberry, and yet you would think I'm in LA or New York City. Like my day is full of listening to a clock playing music incessantly and people screaming at each other outside of my window.
Yeah, and we were just discussing that off air, thinking that maybe it is some kind of disinformation plot, Seth. Seriously, that you are getting way too close to the truth.
Yeah, they got to get me out of this building.
Right. And the only way they're going to do that is by driving you slowly insane.
You know, it's funny you'd say that because the air conditioner, not to get too inside baseball, but the air conditioner in my office is the control panel is outside of my office. So if I turn on the AC, it immediately gets to like below zero in here because the temperature gauge isn't in this room. And for some reason it can hit on average like 80, 85 degrees in my office, even when it's relatively cool out. Like right now it's 65 outside and it's 78 in here. So wow. I'm just constantly miserable, which is, I mean, that's my life anyway, but
that's what's going on. I mean, the man is trying to keep you down, Seth.
Yeah.
That's great for art. Just ask Charles Bukowski. He was miserable for 30 years and yet he created beautiful poetry.
Yeah. I'm a lot like Bukowski, definitely.
I would say Small Town Monsters and Hot Water Music are very similar. Yeah. But the thing is, Seth, it is easier to make it uncomfortable for you to work for the CIA. Mm-hmm. If they wanted to make it uncomfortable for you to work, that's easier than just killing you.
Sure.
Right? Because then you can blame it on the town.
Yeah.
You don't realize that the town mayor's a plan. I mean, if you complain, Seth, he's always complaining about the air conditioning and the jingles on the clock.
Yeah.
And isn't he fussy? And no, they're really, chipping away at your psyche.
I know. And for like years, I've been claiming I was like the sort of like neurotic Woody Allen-esque character of cryptozoology. I I should no longer use that analogy, honestly. But
yeah, it's getting too close to reality.
He's extremely neurotic, and he married his stepdaughter.
I was going to say, like the controversies might put me in a bad light, but yeah, people would just believe I'm paranoid and a whiner, which is probably true as well.
Well, okay. So if you guys hear just a little bit of stuff in the background, that's just the CIA trying to shut Seth up. But we're not going to let that happen today because we're talking terror in the skies. And so why the Thunderbirds, Seth? Why were Thunderbirds and flying cryptids? Why were they the next dimension in your search for monsters? How come you picked them next?
Well, it is funny because originally our eighth movie was going to be a documentary about Bel Gunnis, the serial killer. And at some point last summer, I was reading through something, I cannot remember what, but it had to do with Mark Hall and his research into Thunderbirds. And I don't know. I came across the Lawndale story, which I was familiar with, but I think that was where I really started to look toward Thunderbirds as maybe being our next sort of project. And then the more I looked into it, the more I thought, well, this doesn't have to solely revolve around Thunderbirds. There's any number of winged cryptid sightings in the state of Illinois. And so it's sort of blossomed from there into what it's become, which is I guess sort of a look at the winged cryptid phenomenon as a whole within the state of Illinois. But it was mostly, I was drawn to it because of that Lawndale story, and then everything else kind of came into focus afterward. Like the Alton sightings I was unfamiliar with, Piasaw I was unfamiliar with. So there was a lot of learning during the making of this movie, which is really enjoyable for me. A lot of what we cover has been covered numerous times in other media. And in this case, we were able to sort of dive into a topic that I wasn't at all familiar with and educate myself on the subject as a whole, which was, for me, that was a sort of a drawing point for me.
And let's recap that Lawndale, Illinois story and the story of Marlon Lowe in 1977, in case you guys need a quick refresher from watching Terror in the Skies. I mean, that's a story where there's like a 10-year-old kid out playing, and he gets lifted by a giant eagle and moved like 40 feet.
Yeah. They said so. Yeah, Marlon Lowe and two of his friends were playing in their either front or backyard, and they see these two large birds flying down Kickapoo Creek, which runs directly behind their house. The birds sort of come up over this grove of trees, and one of them launches itself down toward the boys that are playing outside, picks up Marlon. His mom is inside when this happens with some friends. She sees him being carried across the yard, runs out of the house. Actually, I think at that point he was still struggling with the bird. I don't think he'd actually been picked up. She sees him outside struggling with this bird. She runs out of the house. By then, he's being lifted into the air by this bird. The bird flies like 50 feet. She runs toward them screaming. I believe she may have tried to strike it with a broom. And at that point, the bird dropped Marlon and took off over Kickapoo Creek and off into the sort of anyone that's been to Illinois knows that it's almost like looking at the ocean in some of those central Illinois locations. Like there's the fields stretch off to the horizon and they fly off, toward the horizon. The story was reported on by local paper. That story got picked up by the AP. Chicago paper started coming down and interviewing the Lowe family, and soon the story had sort of blossomed, and it was all across the country. It ran, in newspapers, sort of coast to coast. My parents are actually sort of remember that story being in the papers, even here in Ohio. And I've talked to people from all over the country who remember that story, on the front page of newspapers, and which makes it sort of your prototypical small town monsters case, because that's typically the track these things follow. There's an inciting incident. The inciting incident gets picked up by some sort of major media, and then all of a sudden the traditional flap sort of bursts into life, and all of a sudden you've got sightings being reported from all around the area. And that's exactly what happened in Lawndale in 77. You had the Lowe incident sort of hit the gong, as it were, and all of a sudden you've got people from all over central Illinois reporting seeing these two large birds that sort of resembled Andean condors.
Okay, so instead of eagles, they're more like the idea of the condor. When you think that the beaks are different with the condor, almost they're
a little bit more like a vulture.
Yeah, and they even recounted seeing the white plumage around the neck, which is an Andean condor description. So there were, and I actually talked to someone last night who was asking about the Territorn and why people believe the Territorn might have been, some sort of why people believe Thunderbird reports might be chalked up to like some sort of existing remnant of Territorns, and that would actually play into that because the Territorn was sort of an ancient condor, and might have had that same sort of plumage around the neck that like the Andean condor does. So potentially you might have some sort of Territorn existing in Illinois and trying to capture marlin low.
Well, how big can condors get? I mean, they can get pretty big, but big enough to, was Marlon Lowe, obviously he probably wasn't the biggest kid in his class, but was he tiny or small or small for his age?
I believe they said 70 pounds or 77 pounds. And the way it works with birds is they can only pick up to about half their body weight. Sometimes, larger birds can pick up 2/3 their body weight, but either way, you would have been dealing with a bird that was over 140 pounds, which is massive, for a bird. So yeah, the idea of it being an existing bird, to me anyway, has always been kind of absurd. I don't see that sort of, and we've had people posit that maybe it was like a golden eagle or something like that on the Facebook page. So that's the story that really gets your mind working as far as like what the various theories might be to explain what happened to the Lowe family, because there's only so many things it could be, and I think that's why so many Lawndale locals went with ridiculing the family and sort of making them out to be drunks who had sort of imagined the entire event, and that still sort of continues even today. Like when we were in Lawndale, we met up with a local from Lawndale, and that was the first thing he said to us was that the family had been drinking and just imagined the entire event.
And it's just so incredibly sad to me that we have these borders of reality that we guard so zealously, and something very real could be going on there, but yet people want to explain it away.
Well, I think with something like this, though, this at least appears realistic. Like there might be a giant bird, like that comes in the realm of possibility. Is that because they alert people, they're scared about it, they tell people, they stand by their story. They're like, no, man, a giant bird came in, grabbed my kid, and I had to beat it down with a broom. And I think when people ridicule people for stories that are at least somewhat in the realm of possibility, then it makes it so when you have a more outrageous story, then if you ridicule the small stuff, even the stuff that's somewhat believable, then how are we ever going to get to trying to understand the bigger stuff?
Right.
The stuff that exists on a mythical level, beyond what exists on the physical level. Like a giant condor to me is totally believable because I've seen giant people. Alton, Illinois is featured in this, and we'll get to Alton in a second, but Alton, Illinois is featured for a long time in Terror in the Skies. And Alton, Illinois is the home of the tallest man that ever existed.
That's right.
Robert Ludlow.
Yeah.
And he wasn't just kind of tall. He wasn't just Yao Ming tall. And Yao Ming's a big, like he was like 8'11". So he's like 2 foot taller than anyone, maybe not 2 feet taller, but like 1.5 foot taller than anyone else around. So,
Alton, home of giant men and giant birds.
Birds, right. Home of the mutants. If I was their high school football team, whatever, I'd be like, we should call ourselves the mutants.
That's the mascot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we actually mentioned that with Alton at the very end of the movie. There's a line about like Alton being a home to like mythical musicians, giant men, and some I forget what the line is, but I actually am kind of in agreement with you about the like there are cases of gigantism all throughout nature. So to to think that, especially something like the Alton Flap, which was, in 1948, there were all these sightings around Alton and the sister city of St. Louis of what was being called Big Bird, which is hilarious now. If you really just imagine people seeing Big Bird from Sesame Street flying outside their window or something. But
imagine if Big Bird was the cryptid and not Snuffleupagus.
You're right. And
because Sesame Street had its own cryptid for 20 years.
Yeah. But yeah, so there were all these sightings of this giant bird near Alton. And honestly, if people in Lawndale had done some of their research, they would have been less quick to sort of critique the Lowe family, because there was a history of this in the state of Illinois as far back as the 40s. And in the 40s, there was a certain amount of ridicule associated with those Big Bird sightings, but it wasn't anything like the Lowes faced, in the 70s. And I think some of that has to do with like the first sighting of Big Bird in Alton, Illinois in the 40s was by an Air Force colonel. So it wasn't immediately happening to, small town rural families who might be easily dismissed. It was happening to very, I guess, sort of quote unquote legitimate local citizenry. And then you had less of that ridicule factor in the 40s, or maybe in the 40s, people were just slower to make fun of people for seeing something unusual. But yeah, these sightings broke out for about 2 weeks. It's actually longer than 2 weeks. We say 2 weeks, or I think Lauren actually says 2 weeks in the film, but the Alton Flap seemed to go on for about a month. It stretched into May and started in early April and stretched well into May as far as like the newspaper reports I found. So you had all these reports of what seemed to be sort of a giant gray or black bird flying around the area. And there's a number of these reports, and we have names on file, especially in the newspaper articles about the story. You've got all the different names of various eyewitnesses. And what they were seeing seemed to be, again, like not mundane, but an explainable odd event. Like you could definitely see this being some sort of large, abnormally large, but known bird. Until you get to some of the stranger reports, there was a sighting that took place in St. Louis when some people were driving through the city and they actually saw the giant bird flying over the city, and it seemed to be glowing or self-illuminated from the inside, which is very strange.
Man.
Yeah, there's a few of those reports from Alton in the 40s. And there's not a lot to connect the Alton Flap with what happened in Lawndale, because the descriptions of the bird don't really line up. And there was a solitary bird in the 40s, whereas Lawndale, it was almost always, all those reports, not all of them, but a large number of those reports were of two of these large condor-looking birds.
Right. Well, and I have to interject here that I was surprised in, my newspaper research that just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm so sorry, Seth, that I didn't find it sooner, but yeah, just a couple of weeks ago, found another attack of a large bird on a child, on account going back to 1909 from St. Charles, Illinois, which is a little is northerly, northern Illinois, as opposed to Alton, Illinois. But the similarities in the story of the Martin Lowe attack and the St. Charles, Illinois eagle attack. They call it eagle, but if I give you some of the details, it seems that it may have not have been an eagle, unless it was an eagle with gigantism.
Yeah, I've been sharing that story on interviews and giving you credit for sending that to me. I mean, like we always come across this stuff after the fact.
I know, right?
But that's still such a cool thing. And then you found another one, right?
Yeah, well, I've been looking for more information about that particular St. Charles attack, and then so I've just now I have a little bit more time, so I'm looking through and finding just eagle attacks, all over the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And there was in 1909 there seemed to be an epidemic of attacks around the Midwest with, again, often pairs of birds, which is interesting, being spotted. And then one, takes an interest in a child, and then the capture of the child is narrowly averted by standers-by and parents and whatnot. But there are quite a few stories like that. There's one that I just found last night from Pennsylvania, and then another one nearby that region as well, of a little girl who was captured. And then finally dropped upon a nearby roof of an outbuilding near the barn that her family owned. So just imagine that if you have a little kid at home, a little kid playing in the yard, picked up by some large bird, and you almost lose the child, and then you have to retrieve them from a nearby roof. I mean,
well, what I love about these, first of all, the St. Charles one is written so well. This article from 1909, because it's like fighting desperately for 2 hours with a monster eagle to keep his baby from the menacing talons of the great bird. Peter Johnson, a farmer, with the aid of neighbors, finally captured the king of the air. Like it just goes into it with because the kid turned out all right, 35 pounds, which is, I have a 2.5-year-old, and she's about 36 pounds right now.
Yeah.
And Johnson boy, a sturdy child of 3 years. I don't know if I'd call my daughter sturdy, but all right. But these guys, he was playing on his father's farm near St. Charles the other morning when the eagle was first observed. So this gigantic eagle, it says like with a wings.
Let's hold up on the wingspan for a second, because that's going to be a key point. Okay,
but then they even they draw a picture, like it's the New York, like the Wall Street Journal like draws the pictures instead of taking it. Like they have a picture drawing of like the eagle holding the baby and the father like beating him with a stick. Right. And then it even finishes up saying like how like the boy is none the worse for his experience, and he takes great delight in watching the imprisoned bird.
Right. And if we take what you were saying, Seth, I did not know that like birds could only carry like half of their weight, I think you said. And so if we take the weight there, 35 pounds and multiply it by 2, wow. I mean, a 70-pound bird.
Yeah, you can feed like a whole platoon at Thanksgiving or whatever with that guy.
I mean, on occasion. So what I'm going off of. So there's we do an event every year at park here in Ohio, and their wildlife officer is actually the person that relayed that to me, and they said on rare occasions a bird can lift up to 2/3 its body weight. So sometimes it can stretch itself to that point. But I guess half is like the max that most birds will max out at. Then you have to like multiply that. And when you start really looking at what the actual size of these birds would be, it gets a little ridiculous.
Yeah. And when I've been finding these other eagle attacks, the wingspan and the size of the bird is more within the realm of possibility. But this story from St. Charles is really of interest to me because, they put a lot of detail into the story, but, although the farmer is able to get the kid away, he wants to keep the bird because the bird is of such extraordinary size. And then he involves neighbors in helping him capture the bird, which they pin. Yeah, which they pin between 2 pitchforks. And it's stated that they want scientists to look into this, and they want to donate the still living bird to a zoological park. Now, these other eagle attacks I was mentioning, they all report the wingspan if possible. Like if the bird, because in a lot of these cases, the bird is captured or killed in the end, and then they measure it, and we're talking 5, 6, 7 feet wingspan, which, eagles usually top out at about 6 feet or, 5 and change. But in this article from St. Charles, they say that from wingtip to wingtip, the wingspan was 12 feet. And to me, what eagle is 12 feet?
Well, the ones from the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And the Hobbit, those are the ones that are 12 feet.
So the largest living bird right now is the wandering albatross, which can get a wingspan of 12 feet. But, the albatross isn't picking up kids as far as we know. But the idea that a bird could get to that size, I mean, it's like I said, there's a living bird right now with that wingspan, but and we know there's gigantism, but again, it's something extraordinary, but maybe not something unprecedented. So the problem with maligning people like the Low family is when you look into these accounts, sometimes you'll find these compelling historical precedents that are very similar to what is being reported, decades and decades later. And the problem is everybody's dead. Nobody's looking at the newspaper archives. Nobody knows that such things have happened before.
Sure. And and with something like the state of Illinois in general, like I was asked yesterday, like why Terror in the Skies was focused strictly on Illinois instead of, the rest of the country and other states in the country that also feature large bird reports. I mean, PA, like you mentioned, Pennsylvania, there's a massive number of Thunderbird reports from Pennsylvania and like pterodactyl type creature reports as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've featured one of those in Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, and that was like one of many that I've been told about. So those sightings are common in other states, but Illinois has a connection to, as Lauren would call it, winged weirdies in general, going all the way back to the Piasaw legends, and just a connection with known birds in general. Like when we were driving to Louisiana, Missouri to film Momo, we went through a completely different section of the state that we hadn't been to, which was like the western edge of Illinois. And I hadn't actually been to that part of Illinois ever. And we drove through probably 3 or 4 different like bird sanctuary areas, national wildlife refuge places or state wildlife refuges. And they all featured like illustrations or carvings of eagles prominently on the signage, which I thought was kind of cool given Illinois' connection to winged cryptids as well. But it makes sense that stuff is so prominent in the state in general, because the state is especially when you get down into that southern edge with the like Alton area, those bluffs are so like welcoming to large birds, especially eagles. I think that's why you have so many eagles hanging out in Alton, Illinois, that if there is some sort of large bird, it would make sense that it would be hanging out, there, because there's any number of caves, there's places it could nest or hide that would be welcoming for something like that.
Well, what I love too is that you even mentioned like one of the one of the people who you interview mentions like Illinois is huge. Mm-hmm. Like it's way bigger than you think it's going to be when you're driving through it. And because you think Illinois, oh yeah, Chicago's big and it's got, Springfield's the capital and stuff. But there's, 4 hours of like flat land, like in between. Yeah. And, the reason you can see so many damn birds is because you can see out in flat land forever. Yeah. And, and I've performed in various dumps all over the state of our friends to the south in Illinois, and driven through like the super rural areas and everything. And we think about Chicago being the 3rd most populous city in the United States, but then you have the tiniest towns, Paw Paw, and stuff in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And there's plenty of places for these birds to hide. And it's funny too, because in Illinois, you have the very, you got the Chicago accent, the bears and stuff like that. And then 2 hours away, all of a sudden, you feel like you're in Deliverance. Mm-hmm. And so it changes quickly. And I think I really like that you brought out the fact that this state is, number one, it's huge. And number two, there's tons of rural areas where these creatures could be hiding.
Sure. And actually, this is probably the movie we've made that is the most centered around the geography of a location. And a lot of that was by accident. Like we didn't go into Terror in the Skies planning on sort of separating the stories by sections of the state. That was just something that we came up with, or I came up with during the editing of it. But it's almost like 3 states in one, because you've got the really swampy, strangely forested northern section of the state that's broken up by these massive cities. And then you've got 3 very large cities in northern Illinois. And then you've got the central Illinois, which is flat as a pancake, with fields stretching off to the horizon. And then southern Illinois is like almost like that west. What shocked me was Troy Taylor has a line about like how there are mountains in Illinois, and I kind of laughed at it because I'd been in Illinois and I was like, I don't see that.
What are you talking about?
Yeah. But when we went to southwestern Illinois, when we were going down to Missouri, I was shocked because there legitimately are like these huge, I mean, even here in Ohio, we'd call them foothills, but they're very large hills that are verging on mountainous. So there's
it's the entrance to the Ozarks. I mean,
right.
When you're getting there.
Exactly. Yeah. And just the change in terrain is so interesting. And the fact that you've got the 3 various types of flaps, or 3 various flaps coming, and each of them happens to be taking place in each of the different sections of the state. It just made sense to kind of like separate the story into those 3 sort of sections. And I was really happy that we were able to show like the varying sort of terrain of the state. I mean, one thing I can say about the film, like once you come away from it, is I think it gives a really great sense of that state and how the terrain, how the terrain varies.
It makes you want to visit Illinois, and for that reason alone, you should be given an Academy Award. Because that is movie magic, my friends.
Yeah, well, I just thought, yes, the landscapes, the cinematography in terms of, giving you a sense of, Chicago, or, the rolling rural landscapes in other parts of the state. I mean, it's really beautiful and compelling. So I just think it's incredibly shot in that way.
Yeah, Zach and Santino deserve like the lion's share of the credit. The only cinematography I really had anything to do on this was drone. Like I did all the drone footage. Not all of it, but a large part of the drone footage was mine. But yeah, Zach and Santino did a really fantastic job. And I think we were kind of looking for a break from the bleak sort of dark cinematography of like Bray Road Beast, which was the movie we made prior to this. And this offered us like an opportunity to do something that wasn't steeped in horror mythology or like stylized sort of horror like we had done with Bray Road Beast. I mean, it's funny, for a movie called Terror in the Skies, I don't think there's a lot in this movie that is scary.
Unless you're Marlon Lowe.
Yeah, well, that's the only thing. My wife says it's like our most terrifying movie because we have a 2-year-old, and she's of the opinion that this is our scariest movie. But it was never
sturdy 2-year-old.
Yeah, a very sturdy 2-year-old boy. But it was never envisioned as being like let's really scare the audience. Like sometimes with Bray Road, we really were able to push that side of things, like the stylistic sort of horror that we inserted into Bray Road Beast. And this one, I just never saw it that way. And like strangely enough, like during the way Zach and I work is like before we make a movie, we spend a lot of time texting back and forth, and it's usually just like images for movies we like, talking about like the way the look of the movie is going to be. And with this one, I kept talking about Spielberg, but other than a couple stills from Close Encounters, I mostly sent Zach stills from the movie North by Northwest by Hitchcock.
Oh, sure.
And it's funny because like North by Northwest is not set in the Midwest, and it's not really a Midwest movie, but that was.
But it does have that. I mean, it's got
the cornfield,
the plane, the biplane over the cornfield, and then also, I mean, it's set. I mean, the climax is set on Mount Rushmore,
right?
But when you're talking about Spielberg, I'm thinking about that shot in front of the Piazza Bird, and that had to be obviously done with the drone. But I thought you were going to take off Troy Taylor's head with the drone. It came down, and so what we're talking about is there's a shot in the movie. There's a bluff in Alton, Illinois, that shows this legendary Piazza bird, and we'll talk more about that in a second.
Piazza bird.
I'm sorry, the pizza bird. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The pizza bird.
So the thing is,
we love pizza.
And the Piazza bird, they have a mural, a mural of the Piazza bird on this beautiful bluff in Alton, Illinois. And Troy Taylor, who we're going to see next week at the American Hauntings Convention in Alton, he's standing in front of it, and then you see the drone like come in flying, and then down towards the parking lot, towards Troy, and it's a great, that's a great Steven Spielberg style shot, without the crane and things like that. And so, did you handle that one?
I did. The trick in that scene is it's actually reversed. I started in front of Troy and pulled away. And I think in the movie, it actually comes toward him. In reality, I did it in reverse. I just pulled it away from it.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so that's why you weren't going to take his head off.
No, I wasn't.
Damn, he's like Troy, duck.
Yeah, no, I flew it away. And yeah, I mean, there just isn't. There isn't a lot. I think the final scenes with the sun setting and the abandoned house and all that stuff, that might have a little bit of a Spielberg vibe. But at the end of the day, the only part of the movie that I can directly point to and say this might have had some Spielberg homage going on would be the opening with the little boy. Like I feel like that scene is very much kind of maybe a little Spielberg-esque in the way it was shot.
Sure.
But
yeah, the innocence of childhood juxtaposed against great beasts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about the Piazza bird, because we already discussed, like Lauren Coleman is a very, he's cryptozoology in the old school. Like this is just an animal we haven't discovered. This is just a bird with gigantism. And I love that about him. I love the old school 1970s style cryptozoologists who are like, well, we're just dealing with animals we haven't discovered yet.
Sure.
The Piazza bird seems that goes into more of the mythology of the people that lived in the area at the time. So let's do I know Allison's got some points on it. So let's do a quick recap of the Piazza bird for people who maybe watched the movie or maybe haven't watched the movie in a couple weeks, and then talk a little bit about the next part about it.
Yeah, I mean, and Allison can probably set me straight on this, but the thing about the Piazza that I'm still a little confused about.
God, I can't say it right to save my life, can I?
It's okay. I still mess it up.
Pizza
bird.
The pizza bird.
But the pizza bird was, I'm confused about the backstory on it, because what I can't seem to get a read on is whether or not this is actually a Native American legend, or if this is a white man legend that was later attributed to the Native Americans. So
yeah.
So like,
I got the truth bomb for you right here.
Okay, yeah, lay it out.
Okay, so yeah, I love when I am researching and I find things that totally turn me around from what I was thinking. If the world turns upside down, I know that, hey, I've done something right.
Mm-hmm.
And, this was the case. I was happy to find that historical precedent that, went, with the Marlon Lowe case.
Mm-hmm.
But then this Piazza thing went the opposite way on me, in that, so we've been going to Alton for years because of Troy Taylor and his conferences there,
mm-hmm.
and, the haunted history of the area.
Sure.
And so we always go and make a a pilgrimage out to the bluff there to see this beautiful rock painting of this winged beast of tremendous size. And so I, for a while, just, took it at face value, which is, there's this story by a very imaginative, English professor about Piasa, meaning the bird that devours men. And the derivation of the word, I mean, he completely just made that up. And so the story, as it goes, is that there was this huge bird that was killing people in a local tribe from the Illini Confederacy. And the chief came upon this idea that he would use himself as bait. And then the Piasa would come out of the sky, and all these warriors came out of the woods with poison arrows. And that's how they bested the beast and, finally brought its reign of terror to an end.
Yeah.
So it sounds great,
Sure.
the story. And, the beast, as it appears in this rock painting, is massive and looks intimidating. But
it's almost like the winged bulls from Assyria is what I was thinking of. Like, how the ancient Assyrians have the winged bulls that you could see at the Oriental Institute in Chicago.
Yeah.
That's totally what it reminded me of, the Piasa beast. There's another Illinois connection, even though it's, Chicago taking the stuff from 3,000 miles away.
Right. So then when I looked deeper into it, I was really surprised that, hey, this story doesn't really hold water. It looks like something that you were saying, Seth, like it's something that a white man made up and was like latched on to people as this is the Native American history. But and the rock art that is there is just a reproduction.
It's a third generation reproduction. It's not even like a reproduction second generation. This is the third time that's been put on the cliff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing, there's like a weird, so I do this podcast Monsteropolis with my buddy Mark Matsky, and Mark is a voracious reader. And he actually discovered this book about I believe it's either the Japanese or Chinese. For some reason I'm thinking it's Japanese, even though Chinese makes more sense to me. But he has this book that he found about basically how there were these maybe I'll just go with Chinese because it just makes more sense in my head now.
Sure.
We can link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, but
that will end the controversy.
Well, essentially, they're trying to the book is trying to insinuate that the Piasa bird was actually created by these ancient Chinese pilgrims who somehow found the Americas.
Oh yeah,
and painted it. I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but I hadn't. I thought it was fascinating that they painted it on the side of the bluff, and that's why it's there.
Okay, well, that connects into like a whole nother podcast that we should do sometime, which is about the diffusionist history of the Americas.
I thought it was the lost tribe of Israel that did it.
Right. See, that's the other thing. If it's not Chinese or Phoenician or Egyptian, it's the last tribe of the Israelites.
It's obviously the Polacks.
Right. So here's the thing. There are all these stories, and a lot of them are in the Midwestern area of these earthworks and other, petroglyphs and other things, which the white people, unfortunately, the Europeans take the position that, Native people couldn't have done this. So they find alternative explanations, and it's generally by anthropologists called diffusionist theories, that these Westerners essentially came from Europe to the New World, and then they're really the ones responsible for like Cahokia or these tremendous earthworks like the Serpent Mound in Ohio.
Yeah,
and
we
stuff
just
like that.
we just did a show about that stuff, like the because there's some sort of mound in southern Ohio where they've claimed to have found like Hebrew tablets on these things, which as a having the Jewish blood in me that I do, I'm totally okay with that. But I see what you mean. I've actually never heard that term for it.
Right. It's called diffusionism.
Interesting.
I mean, basically, it's a way to dehumanize another population that you're taking something from. It's like when they said that, well, blacks are good at singing, but they're never going to be good at writing.
Sure.
Right.
They're happy. They're happy with what they have.
They take away the credit. And I'm going to read. See, this is the thing that turned it around for me. And I have some prior knowledge that I'm going to share too, because I taught for 13 years at an intertribal school.
Mm-hmm.
And the way the Thunderbird is seen in Midwestern Native cultures is very different than, let's say, the Mothman, which confers this air of foreboding and evil.
Sure.
It's like the opposite response to the Thunderbird in at least the cultures that I know of in the Midwest, the Menominee, the Ojibwe, the Oneida even that originally came from New York. They have a very different understanding of the Thunderbird. But let's get into the Piasa for just a moment here. So on the historical marker, when you go to the Piasa Park, you'll see information about when in the 1600s, Father Jacques Marquette came to visit and survey the area. So he's the one who discovered these what were probably petroglyphs on the side of bluffs. Not where the Piasa is depicted right now, but in the area, let's say. So he came upon this huge art, this huge rock art, and it actually depicted two creatures, which is interesting.
Right.
And this was his quote. While skirting some rocks, which by their height and length inspired awe, we saw upon them two painted monsters, which at first made us afraid, and upon which the boldest savages dare not rest their eyes. They are as large as a calf. They have horns on their heads like those of a deer, a horrible look, red eyes, and a beard like a tiger's, a face somewhat like that of a man's, a body covered with scales, and so long a tail that it winds all around the body, passing above the head and going back between the legs, ending in a fish's tail. Red, green, black are the three colors composing the picture. Moreover, these two monsters are so well painted that we cannot believe that any savage, here's that diffusionism coming in, that we cannot believe that any savage is their author. For good painters in France would find it difficult to reach that place conveniently to paint them. Here is approximately the shape of these monsters as we have faithfully recorded it. Father Jacques Marquette, and it's dated 1673.
Right, and that's now, without wings, right?
Right.
Yes.
No wings are mentioned.
Yeah. So that's what one interest. I'm not cutting. You can get back into that, but I just wanted to point this out. One interesting thing about the movie is that it is bookended by two subjects that have investigators / researchers at odds with each other over it, because you've got everyone conflicting over the Chicago Mothman stuff, and then you've got the conflicts between, like, even Troy Taylor and Ken Gerhardt are contradicting one another in their descriptions of the Piasa. Yeah, we need to really work on getting one of those together, and I'll film it.
I would do a pay-per-view in the ring, paranormal pay-per-view. Let's have a Piasa SmackDown.
Troy's gonna fight dirty. I guarantee. Ken's gonna get a chair upside the back of his head, I think.
Battle of the Beards.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really glad that you mentioned the controversy, and I think that kind of controversy is good. I think that people looking into things as deeply as they can, and then addressing where things don't match. I mean, I think that's really, really something important. But it's healthy to have these disagreements. I think that's going to benefit the field in the long run.
Well, if we think the Piasaw bird real quick, if we think the Piasaw bird as a cryptozoological phenomenon, so if you think of it as a physical creature, that's what they saw, then it's not going to be a giant condor. It's not going to be a golden eagle. It's going to be something completely different. So that leads us into beyond the realm of the physical. And is it a mythical? Is it a supernatural creature?
Right. In fact, likely what Marquette saw on the rocks was a depiction of what's called the underwater panther, or in the Ojibwe, it's Mishabiju or Mishapiju. And it's not that there aren't Thunderbird petroglyphs. There certainly are, but and there's a whole book written about it that I just picked up, and I'm really excited about it. It's called Hidden Thunder. So it really banks on that Thunderbird concept. Hidden Thunder, rock art of the upper Midwest. So there are a lot of Thunderbird petroglyphs all over the Midwest, and very near that area of Alton, Illinois, just over the border in Missouri. There's tons of petroglyphs of Thunderbirds as well. But here's the thing. So they're traversing this area by canoe, and what are they going to see on the rocks? Are they going to see a warning of a big bird coming out of the sky, or what's more likely? It's more likely that it was this underwater panther, which, although the Thunderbird is generally thought to be benevolent, the malevolent creatures are creatures that come from underwater or underground. And one of those creatures is Misapiju, who drowns travelers. So likely that's what they were seeing, because you notice the details in Marquette's description of the fish tail. So Thunderbirds are not depicted with horns or these long winding tails or with scales, but Misabiju is.
Yeah.
So that's likely what it was. Now, it does relate to the Thunderbird, because the Thunderbird and Misapiju are
enemies.
The two enemies, right? It's like they're the arch enemies of at least the cosmology of the native people in this area that I'm familiar with. And the idea is that the Thunderbird is actually a protector of the people in most cases. I know, going back to those historical accounts of eagle attacks, you kind of wonder about
maybe
that.
he was trying to take Marlin away from his drunken mother.
Maybe. But so the idea of the Thunderbird is that it will fight Misabiju, and it will keep these monsters at bay so they don't devour humanity.
Very cool.
And the idea is that the lightning that strikes the ground will keep these beasts underneath the earth, keep them from coming up and taking over humanity. And also in the Menominee tradition, for example, the Thunderbird, this kind of like blows the whole feel of the movie Terror in the Skies, because they depict the Thunderbird as this black silhouette with a heart in the middle. And the reason for that is the Thunderbird is thought to bring these life-giving gifts of the rain and the lightning to wake up the earth, to keep the creatures down. And there are also, this is just an aside, but in Japan, they're doing all kinds of studies that are finding that lightning strikes in an area actually cause mushrooms, at least, to more than double their production. So there is some validity to that. And a lot of times traditional stories carry science with them. So the idea of the Thunderbird coming is that, the thunderers come and they bring the spring, they bring life. And at my former school, every spring we would rededicate something called the spirit pole, which is a cedar pole that we put a tobacco tie on the top. And that's the spirit pole we go to throughout the year to give prayers to the spirits. But it's dedicated to the Thunderbird, asking for protection against the coming spring storms. And so the feel around it is very benevolent. So I just wanted to interject that in there, and that I was just shocked when I found things lining up that the Piasa bird is not a bird at all. So there you go. There's your truth bomb.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I love that there. And just a real quick to add on, when we're talking about the terror in the skies and the Thunderbird sightings and giant bird sightings, and we're talking about the Piasa and the water panther. It's just over the border in Wisconsin from Illinois, in Lake Geneva, or on Geneva Lake in Williams Bay, where that was said when great storms would happen, it was the Thunderbird fighting the water panther. And,
right.
And so it was in that place. And so that's even part of when we talk about, and Lake Geneva is basically Chicago North, because the whole city was developed after the rich people in the Great Chicago Fire lost their houses and things like that in the fire. But it just, we're talking about the state of Illinois and giant birds. Like, it's almost inescapable. Anywhere Illinois touches, so do legends of giant birds. And that comes, and that's straight out of from the native population to the people who are living there today.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And just to piggyback on something Allison said about the tone of despite the name, despite the name Terror in the Skies, the idea regarding at least the Thunderbird sections of the movie was never about let's make this as creepy as possible, because to me there's actually nothing really creepy about the idea of a giant bird. Even the opening with the little boy seeing it isn't really about this kid being terrified of a giant bird. He's actually supposed to be looking at it with wonder, and that's kind of why that scene opens the movie. Oh, good, we got music starting up again.
I was gonna say you have your own soundtrack wherever you go, Seth.
Yeah, it's really wonderful.
I really do think that you get that sense in the movie, that sense of awe of the giant birds, and I like that. You bring Lauren in, and originally we're talking about what could be the physical animals that do it, and then we move into, I think, the last part of it. We come into the Chicago Mothman. And that's different than the Thunderbird too, because, when people think about the Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in the 1960s, there was always a sense of dread and a sense of terror when you saw this winged humanoid with black eyes,
sure,
versus, the Thunderbird who's bringing life and things like that. And so I kind of like how you move, okay, this is what could be physical, and now we're entering a realm of dude with wings. Okay. That's not going to be physical. That's not going to be a lost species.
Yeah, and the movie really begins with the stuff that might be more supernatural, with Kyle Danhausen's sighting of what looked very much like a pterodactyl. So you go from the fairly easily explainable, not easily explainable, but the somewhat explainable Thunderbird sightings, into the pterodactyls and the flying humanoids, and Mothman obviously falls under the flying humanoid category. So, and we all know Allison is just so negative about our enjoyment of the Chicago Mothman story.
Oh, sorry, guys. I hate to rain on the parade.
Well, the thing is, and we've talked about the Chicago Mothman 1,000 times in this podcast. But I think that the point you make in the movie, Allison, and this is what kind of excited me about it, was that maybe there was a sighting of something. Maybe there was something supernatural, something remarkable. And then a lot of these reports are just disinformation. Coming after, they're the flap. They're the people who are just sending in anonymous reports and stuff like that after that and saying, "Oh, I saw something. Oh, don't put my name there." Versus, so maybe something in the beginning was an actual sighting, and now all these other things are there to kind of cover it up, kind of like that music is covering up Seth's, getting close to the truth.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I feel about it. I think, I've been kind of railroaded and depicted unfairly as some kind of dogmatic skeptic. But I'm really just trying to be decisive, incisive, cut away the chaff and get to, the real heart of something that might be true.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a skeptic because extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. And I've seen some extraordinary things. And so I can't say that none of this stuff isn't real.
No, I actually love that section of the movie. For me, it's probably second behind the Lawndale section, just because of the fact that it's so much more focused on sort of a skeptical response to something, which is sorely lacking, maybe not sorely lacking, but lacking in a lot of our films. Like, you don't typically have that. They just started playing another song.
They're doing requests.
You don't typically have that like skeptical response to these phenomena in our films. So I think it actually is something that we've been lacking in the films overall. So I actually really appreciate that section of the movie because it's so interesting to hear everyone sort of going back and forth about it.
Yeah, and I just think it's important to do that, to go back and forth about it, and then also try to clear the water a little bit. I mean, I think the water's really muddy right now, and I just, going forward, I want to see like higher standards in what we claim as investigation, so we can have a better idea of what it might be real and what is bogus. Because as investigators, we just don't have that much time to waste.
Right.
Well, I think it's well done with people talking back and forth, and obviously our friend Tobias from Singular Fortean, he features in, and he does a great job. And Lauren comes in, and he does a great job. And Allison, of course, you look beautiful in that theater. I must say, I was stunned. I was like, "This is my sister. She's a movie star."
Yeah, right.
So
Yeah.
I thought you looked great. But also,
Thanks.
I think everybody comes off well, and I think it was edited well and put together. And it's a compelling section of, okay, here's some reports. Here's what they might be. Here's what's conflicting. Here's where we need to go, because this is very new. Everybody's still alive. This is in 2017. This is in 2018. And so reports are online. We can check IP addresses. We can look into those kind of things, and all that kind of stuff can be done in investigation. Like, research is just looking what other people did. Investigation is trying to get at the bottom of things. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of different things. Like, research is just, we can't talk to that guy in St. Charles that saved this kid in 1909 and say, "Can you show me the stick you used to beat the crap out of that golden eagle?" But we can talk to people today and find out. One thing is, I was trying to see, is it that Mothman witnesses, like modern witnesses, weren't willing to get on camera with you, Seth?
I had one witness lined up, and he pulled out the day we were supposed to film him. He stopped answering calls. So I had one lined up, and that one was someone that Lon Strickler had referred to contact info from. So and I had spoken to him on the phone. He was all about it. And then the day of, he backed out. We actually lost two witnesses on that film where they backed out or quit answering calls. There was another Thunderbird witness who actually, unfortunately, he would have been great because he had a sighting right around the same time Jeff Byers' sighting and in the same general area. So he actually would have helped bolster Byers' story. But yeah, unfortunately, he stopped answering calls the week of the filming and never did get back with me.
Well, this is why it's great to talk to you today, to have this behind the scenes information that kind of, like, after you watch the film, this kind of completes it. But I know we're running low on time here. Is this going to be a trilogy? I had heard that, you have the Mothman of Point Pleasant. Now you have Terror in the Skies. Is there a third film planned?
Yeah, I mean, we're calling it the Mothman trilogy. Obviously, Terror in the Skies is only tangentially sort of connected to the Mothman of Point Pleasant. But the Mothman Legacy comes out next year. And we'll focus heavily on some of the underexplored aspects of that 66, 67 flap that we didn't get into in our film, in our first
Fantastic.
film. It'll be much more centered on the UFO Men in Black activity, and then we've got some plans regarding the Walmsley family and how they'll be represented in the film as well. Ashley, I'm friends with Ashley Walmsley, and I actually wanted her in The Mothman of Point Pleasant, and it just never worked out. She's going to be sort of our POV character, similar to how her dad was in the first movie. We're gonna kind of delve into the legacy of that of the Mothman and how it's impacted, her family legacy.
Well, and I think that's awesome because, I feel like the UFO, the Men in Black, the Indrid Cold, the Grinning Man, that kind of stuff is not as explored. And, we have these winged humanoid sightings, and like multiple people see that, and they call the cops, and there's the feeling of dread, and then the collapse after, and all that kind of stuff is dramatic from the cryptozoology perspective. But then the UFO and Men in Black completely changes it into a high strangeness thing. And I really, that's the kind of thing where people are like, oh yeah, people saw a flying dude. That's dumb. Yeah. Like, no, they also saw this and they also saw that, and they got weird phone calls and all these kind of things that follow up that make it so much more interesting and go so much deeper. Like Marlon Lowe, like he was picked up by a giant bird. Like the Men in Black didn't come to his house and, they didn't neuralize him or whatever and say, you forget about that golden eagle. You never saw him, kind of thing.
They probably put a clock outside his house that played music all the time
and drove him
crazy.
So, so that's coming up in the trilogy. And if you guys have not seen Terror in the Skies yet, I highly recommend it. I think it's great. Obviously, since my friends are in it and my sister's in it, I heartily recommend it just on that aspect. You see everybody looking great in HD and lit and stuff like that. But also, it's, I think the graphics are cool. Some of the shots are really incredible. And to know that, obviously, Seth, so your budget is like $2-3 million a movie, right?
No, this is, having said that, this is the most expensive thing we've ever done. It went way, way, way over budget. My wife wanted to kill me by the time it was all over. But we went dramatically over budget. I think this one's probably more at like the 18,000 end of things, which would, like I said, it's probably it's well above what Bray Road cost, and that just comes down to the amount of like animation and CGI that are present in the film. It just costs a boatload. It's funny because Momo, which we're working on now, is probably the least expensive thing we've done since Boggy Creek Monster, and it's coming out the same year as the most expensive thing we've done. So.
Well, what you can put together with $18,000, it's certainly, you see every penny on the screen.
Awesome.
So we're going to have links so you guys can pick that up in the show notes and watch it in the trailers and everything if you haven't yet. But, this is the recommended listening after watching that, so you get a little bit behind the scenes. Allison, any last questions for Seth?
No, I just look forward to working with you again. And if I find any more weirdness, I'll be sure to send it your way. I'd love to talk to you, more about native beliefs in these monsters, because I think there's a whole nother dimension there.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is the thing that I keep harping on in interviews. There's a reason, because I keep getting asked about it. There's a reason we really don't go too deep into the native cultural beliefs regarding Thunderbirds in the movie, and that is simply because there are no natives to speak for themselves. And I balk at having a bunch of white dudes sort of speak on their behalf.
Well, there are elders out there who would love to talk to Seth, so let's reconvene on that at some later time.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Although, thank you so much, Seth. Allison, great job in the movie. Seth, great job putting together the movie. And you can find all the links to everything at othersidepodcast.com/252. And if you watch Terror in the Skies and want to talk to Allison directly about her part in that movie, you'll be able to find her at the American Hauntings Ghost Conference this weekend in Alton, Illinois. She'll be speaking at like 10:30 in the morning on Saturday, June 22nd. Now, June 21st, you'll also be able to see the kickoff of the convention with Wendy and I. Hi, Wendy.
Hey! Hey, surprise, I'm here.
With Wendy and I, as we will be playing music, Sunspot Rock, songs right from the Paranormal Podcast, See You on the Other Side, live at the American Hauntings Conference in Alton, Illinois.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And if you want a little more background on that, we're in the bonus episode from May 28th from what was the name of that podcast, Wendy?
American Hauntings Podcast.
Oh, American Hauntings Podcast. Yeah. So they got super creative with the name of the conference and everything.
Yeah, and we talked to Cody on there, and you can listen to that episode to get a little bit more of our background as musicians and weirdos, I guess, as it were. But we're looking forward to returning. This will be, I think, our third year.
This will be our third year performing, with our fourth year at the conference.
Yeah, and we'll also have a booth. So if you happen to be there, please stop by our booth and say hello.
Yes, that's absolutely. The thing is, if you don't have a Sunspot CD yet, you can come to our booth and you can say, "Hey, I heard you were giving away free CDs on See You on the Other Side," and we'll have a free CD for you.
There it is, right there.
Right,
free stuff, swag.
There it is. There it is. Okay. Either way, speaking of music, we should probably get to the song of the week. Mm-hmm. Now, terror in the skies, thinking about gigantic birds, thinking about beasts in the air. We want to do something a little more upbeat, a little faster, a little more hard rockin'. And so we just went with something easy. Yeah. And so this is Sunspot with Thunderbird.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
And we can't wait to see you at American Hauntings Convention this weekend. This is our fourth year. Make sure you come up to say hi. And also make sure you come up to us and say, I want to be on your Patreon.
That's right. You can sign up right there at the booth. And hopefully we'll meet some of our Patreons.
Yes.
Our current Patreon members, which I think I know will be there.
Right. And we're looking forward to hanging out in IRL.
Meet space.
Yes. We look forward to seeing you in meet space.
It's going to be fun, as it always is. In fact, we probably will have to have a little impromptu See You on the Other Side meetup.
I think we shall.
The local watering hole.
I believe the local watering hole in the hotel, which I can't, I've broken glasses there. It's
gotten ugly.
I lost my phone there. One time we commandeered the karaoke to just sing Rocky Horror songs for like an hour and 15 minutes.
Good times.
Either way, we like to party at American Hauntings, and certainly we're going to be doing it this Friday and Saturday in Alton, Illinois, which is a haunted AF place.
Anyways, speaking of our Patreon members, thank you guys so much for being amazing.
We kiss you. We want to thank Dr. Ned, who's a Patreon at the level where he gets a shout out in every single episode of See You on the Other Side.
Yeah,
Ned, you're my man. And just want to say thank you so much for the support, because it means a lot. And to all of our Patreons and the awesome See You on the Other Side Patreon community, we think you guys are the best. And we can't wait to have a meetup, an online meetup next week. As we get to the end of June.
Not in Meat Space.
Not in Meat Space, but in, like this one will be on Skype or whatever. And we're going to talk about all the cool stuff we saw. And you could ask questions of Allison directly, because she's going to have a really cool presentation. I'm sure Rosemary Ellen Guiley will be there again, and I will bug her about the gin.
Yes.
I'll be like, Ro, what do you think about them gin? It's just going to be a lot of fun. So please, if you guys are interested in having a conversation with us and joining a really intelligent, fun group of people that meets once a month, and as we get more people, hopefully more times a month,
yes,
check out our Patreon at othersidepodcast.com/donate.
My day is full of listening to a clock playing music incessantly and people screaming at each other outside of my window.